Hi everybody, thanks for joining. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of options for Mass Effect. So you can play Mass Effect 1 in English, French, German, Spanish, and Italian. Now, there are other Mass Effect games in the series that have different language options. I'll link that down in the description just in case your language may not be here or you want to play one of the other games in the series. And you actually can see the minimum system requirements down here. Now, you can pick up Mass Effect on Steam for $19.99, at least at the time of this recording, but you can also play it on EA Origin or with EA Play. I don't exactly know how the language options work with Origin, but it's worth checking out if you want to use Origin instead. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt. Today I want to talk about how to learn languages with Mass Effect. And Mass Effect is an amazing game. It's a great RPG, and it's an awesome resource to learn languages to. So what is Mass Effect? Well, Mass Effect is a science fiction drama, a huge space opera that takes place in the future, and you take control of Commander Shepard and go through this huge story, just basically of a science fiction futuristic nature. And what I'll do is I'll just show off some of the gameplay, some of the language learning elements in the background as I talk about the game. So if you're a little bit tired of fantasy or medieval games, Mass Effect provides a great alternative that's kind of more science fiction based. And, first off, the game is just really awesome in of itself. It has a great story, a great cast of characters, and it's overall just an awesome and very fun game. And there's actually 3 games in the series. A lot of people really like the second game. That's their favorite, probably because the combat was reworked quite a bit. My personal favorite is the first one still, but really you can play any of the 3 games and get the same benefit out of it. The only difference is that maybe the graphics might be a little bit nicer. The combat system is a little bit better in the later entries. So if you find the first game a little bit clunky, the second and third game might be a little bit better from a combat perspective. So what are the advantages of Mass Effect? Well, like I said, in of itself, it's a great game with a great story, characters, an overall universe. So from a learning perspective, that's huge because you have this huge story, this huge world to explore, and you'll be exploring it in the language that you're trying to learn. And from a language learning perspective, it's really great, as are really any RPGs out there. So you have the advantage to play the game with subtitles or no subtitles. And so obviously, if you have subtitles, it's going to make the process a little bit easier. You're going to have some text to be able to see in terms of analyzing the grammatical structure of things, to see vocabulary words. And so I think for a lot of people, you probably should use subtitles. Now, if you're looking for a more maybe authentic experience, want to really practice your listening skills, you can turn those subtitles off, but that is an option to kind of help facilitate your language learning in general. And the big advantage of Mass Effect is that there's just so much audio content. So the game is fully voice acted, and you can really just talk to a number of characters. And basically, it's almost like a choose your adventure. You can choose what you say, and you can be kind of a good guy or a rebel. And so there's that kind of role playing aspect, and there's so much audio content to explore. So probably the big advantage from a language learning perspective is just how much audio content you will be seeing and experiencing as you play the game. Now, from a vocabulary perspective, if you have subtitles on, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to learn words with that audio content. But like I said, from a listening perspective, that's probably the biggest advantage. And in addition to the audio content, you'll probably be picking up words and getting more comfortable with grammar. But the audio is really where this game totally shines. And as I said, it's a huge narrative. There's a huge story. There's a bunch of side quests. And so you're almost going to be kind of tested on your overall comprehension of the game by following the story, knowing what's going on in the interaction with various characters and the decisions that you make. So it's not just like a passive adventure. You're really having to make choices along the way, and you want to understand what's going on. So it's really good in that sense. In a lot of ways, Mass Effect is kind of like more of watching a Netflix show, but it's more interactive in nature. And another advantage too is that a lot of the vocabulary is very specialized. So it takes place in a science fiction kind of universe, and you'll see a lot of the the same vocabulary again and again. And you also will see a lot of the same vocabulary in the menus and RPG elements of the game in of itself. Now, I think there are other games that do the RPG element a little bit better, and it's somewhat limited compared to those games. So you might get a little bit less out of vocabulary acquisition from the menus and RPG kind of elements, but it is still there, and it's a great way to pick up vocabulary as well. And the other thing too that's a huge advantage is that the action of the game really helps break up the language learning process. So some RPGs are very thick with content. You're always reading something, you're always listening to something. But with Mass Effect, it's kind of you talk to some people and then you're in combat, or you go and do something and you're not really actively doing language learning. So, that's okay, because that kind of gives you a break. It gets your mind a little bit of a rest, and it probably allows you to play for longer, enjoy the experience, but also get language learning at the same time.
Wir haben oben einige Quasartische, falls Sie interessiert sind.
Was können Sie mir über die Schwestern sagen, die für Sie arbeiten?
Nun, Jenna ist weg und arbeitet jetzt in Koras Nest. Jetzt macht sich ihre Schwester Rita Sorgen, dass sie in Gefahr sein könnte. Aber Jenna wird kaum ihre Meinung ändern. Sie ist ziemlich dickköpfig.
Now, the big disadvantages with Mass Effect is that using Google Translate is a bit difficult. At least if you're playing the game in Steam, it doesn't play exactly in a Steam window, so you can't open up an internet browser and have Google Translate very easy right there. Now, if you're running a second monitor, you can always play the game in windowed mode and have Google Translate kind of out there on the side, but it still is a little bit kind of clunky to use. And that being said, too, a lot of the dialogue is moving very quickly. So as characters speak, the text keeps moving on. And so it might be very hard to translate a lot of the words that are coming your way in real time. So using Google Translate is going to be very difficult. You can obviously use it to translate certain words in menus or when you're reading text, but in terms of the dialogue, it's going to be very hard to use. And that's probably the biggest disadvantage that Mass Effect has for it. In addition, there are some bugs that I've encountered with the PC port of the game. There's some kind of random stuttering and things like that. It wasn't enough to really break my experience, but it's something to point out at least, because I think some people are bothered by that. And the thing is, too, because the dialogue is constantly going, you're probably going to need at least a fair skill level to understand what's going on. So if you're an absolute beginner to learning a language, this might not be the best game, just because you really do need to understand at least a fair amount of vocabulary words, have some grammar and listening skills under your belt to really get the full experience, just because the dialogue is moving at a fair clip. It's basically like watching a Netflix show. Like I said, so you do want to kind of come in with some skill level, but it doesn't have to be an expert, but it's just something to kind of point out. And like I mentioned before, the RPG system is a bit limited from this game, and so there are elements like reading menus and things like that you would probably get more of an advantage out of, in other games versus Mass Effect, but it's not a huge deal breaker in the end of the day.
Captain uns wissen lässt.
Joker, Statusbericht.
Sind gerade am Massenportal vorbei, Captain. Die Tarnsysteme sind aktiviert. Alles in Ordnung.
Gut. Dann finden Sie eine Kommbarke und locken uns ins Netzwerk ein. Ich will, dass die Missionsberichte an die Allianz übermittelt werden, bevor wir...
So how do you approach things? Well, I like to think of this game as an interactive movie. And really, it's just about experiencing the story, playing the game, and just having fun. And as I mentioned, using Google Translate is going to be very difficult. I tried it both ways, and even in windowed mode, it's going to be very difficult. You can't really translate as you go. So really the best way to approach it is kind of like how you would use Netflix. I wouldn't really use Google Translate too much unless you're very, determined to do that, or you really want to look up certain words and menus. But just treat the game, I guess, in my opinion, like an interactive movie, just because Google Translate is going to be very difficult. And this brings up kind of my second point is don't be afraid that things progress too quickly and that you're not going to understand everything, especially with Google Translate being hard to use. There's going to be words, there's going to be grammar that you don't understand, especially as the game moves quite quickly. But, don't be afraid of that. You can definitely get a lot of value out of the game. You can understand what's going on and piece things together, even if you're not understanding every word or the audio content's very quick. Don't be afraid of that. And if you're kind of already someone that's very focused in on accuracy and stuff, this might be a great game to kind of help you get more comfortable with the idea of being comfortable with uncertainty and not knowing everything in the language learning process. And, while you can take things slowly in the process when you're using Mass Effect to learn a language, a lot of the dialogue you can repeat in the game, so you can hear the audio content more than once, especially with the subtitles on. So there's a lot of menus that you can read. You can really take your time in a lot of aspects of the game. So, as with any video game, take the process slowly and enjoy the experience. You don't have to rush through things. And probably if you go at a fair pace and take your time, you're going to get a lot out of the language learning process in general. And the other thing too is don't be afraid to vocalize things out loud. It's going to be limited in certain parts just because your character will have options on what you can say, but they probably aren't going to say that text verbatim. And so it's going to be kind of a little bit immersion breaking, but you can still do that to practice speaking, to work on your accent. You can also read menus out loud or some of the kind of codex entries and things like that. But if you do want to practice your pronunciation or speaking, there are definitely options and ways to do that. But just don't be afraid to try that out. Or if you want to take a more passive kind of interactive movie approach, you can do that as well.
Ich bin sehr froh, dass Sie endlich jemanden zur Hilfe geschickt haben.
Sie haben sich verspätet, oder?
Arcelia. Tut mir leid, Commander. Wir alle sind ein wenig mit den Nerven runter seit...
Aufpassen! Es entgeht im Turm!
Wir müssen den Kern der Kolonie verteidigen.
And with all that being said, that's what I had to say on how to learn languages with Mass Effect. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It is Commander Shepard's favorite YouTube channel on the Citadel, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.